May the words of my mouth, the meditation of each of our hearts be found acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Jesse, I think we'll turn that down just a hair, if you don't mind. I wonder how many of you saw the story in the news this week about the three Canadian sailors, who were sailing in their small sailboat off Hawaii. And they were struck by a huge storm. The mast was broken, and they sent out a mayday. It looked like they were going to sink at any time. Now you can imagine this sailboat, maybe 20, 30, 40 feet long, reasonable size, but nothing too big. The shock that they would have received, and their mayday was responded to by a 272-foot meter container boat. This container ship, gigantic container ship, was only a few miles away, responded to their mayday, came alongside this little tiny sailboat. Waves were 24 feet up and down and up and down, and although the container ship, this gigantic container ship, was trying to help the sailboat, he ended up crushing against the sailboat, smashed it into smithereens, and suddenly the sailors are in the water. And I'm sure they're wondering, well, we wanted help, but really we didn't want help quite like that. It took some hours, but finally the container ship sailors did bring them aboard. They survived, were taken back to Hawaii for safety. But sometimes it just is that way. We know we want help, but we're just not quite sure if we want help the way God is going to give it to us. I remember the very same lesson coming home to me in my first year of university, which any of us who have been through that time know that's a very tumultuous time of our lives, perhaps away from home for the first time, out in the big bad world, trying to find our way, trying to find how we are going to approach life now, away from mom and dad and on our own. I think a few of the young people present here today know what I'm talking about. Well, I felt that very same way my first year of university. A lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And so I cried out to God, God, help me. But the answer that God brought to my prayer was certainly not what I expected. I knew I had some difficulties with the challenges of being on my own and facing the academic rigors of first year at university. But I never expected God's answer to my prayer would be a grade 9 graduate, young man, and a bit older than myself, but he went to the Presbyterian church in Kingston. I got to know John Maltby was his name. But John was a very special saint of God. He had a wonderful degree of love, compassion, and faith in God. And it was John Maltby, this grade 9 graduate, me, the proud first-year university student at Queen's, thought probably this would not at all be the person that God would use to help me. But it was John who taught me in many ways for the first time in my life what it personally meant to reach out and receive the help from my God, to trust in God in faith as I never had before in my life. John Maltby was God's answer to prayer for me, that first-year university student facing all the challenges that I was facing. Not the answer that I would have expected God would have given to me, but it was God's answer. John was God's answer to my prayer for help. Well, whether it's a container ship that comes alongside us when we're struggling in a sailboat, or whether we're facing the challenges of life that circumstances bring, and God speaks to us, but God speaks to us in ways that we do not expect to receive that help. This is exactly the story in the Old Testament. It's a wonderful story, one of the most dramatic stories, captivating stories you'll find anywhere in the pages of the Scriptures, the Old Testament or the New Testament. It's a story of a general, a great and powerful man named Naaman, struck down by leprosy. He is in great need. And as Naaman prays to God, his God as he understands God, the answer that Naaman receives in this wonderful dramatic story is just the opposite in way after way after way than what Naaman expected. Joan read the story for us today, but let me just rehearse it for your minds again. Naaman is a general of the army of the king of Aram. We'd call that area now Syria. Damascus was part of Aram, the capital city of Aram, Damascus. But these were the arch enemies of the people of Israel. They were at war with each other constantly, and if they weren't at war, they were sending sort of raiding parties back and forth. And in fact, Naaman and his soldiers had entered into Israel in one of these raiding schemes, skirmishes, and they'd taken a young woman captive, made her a slave in his home. She was an Israelite girl. And so when this little girl, obviously a young lady of great faith, heard about now her master, her slave master's illness, leprosy that Naaman had come down with, she said in a powerful degree of faith, Naaman, why don't you go over to Israel? There's a great man of God named Elisha. I think he can help you. Very simple statement of faith. But Naaman was a proud man. He was a powerful general of the forces of the king of Aram, arch enemies of the people of Israel. Well, what do you mean, go over to Israel, to our enemies, to one of their prophets and ask for help, ask for healing from them? They are my enemies. I'm at war with them. That certainly cannot be the source of my help and my healing. But he weighs it over in his mind. Can it really do any harm, perhaps, is what he says to himself. So he goes to his king, the king of Aram, his boss, and says, "O king, can you release me for a couple days? I want to go over and see what this prophet is all about, to see if my slave girl was right to say, if I go to him, I will receive healing of my leprosy." Naaman has the right sense of what he needs to do. He needs to go over and find Elisha, but his king just doesn't get it. The king of Aram doesn't get it at all that it could possibly be just this no-name prophet over in Israel, known by this young lady. No, it must be, he must have meant, this little slave girl must have meant that I was to send my general over to the king of Israel. Surely if somebody in Israel is going to heal me, or heal my servant, General Naaman, it would have to be somebody important. Somebody with some power and some dignity, some influence. So what the king of Aram does, totally disregarding the words of his general to go to this prophet, he says, well, I'll give you all these bags of money as kind of an offering to the king of Israel. And if you take all this money over, give it to him, say that I sent you, a little bit of diplomatic power and influence, surely the king of Israel will give you healing. Well, that's what Naaman does. He knows he's supposed to go to Elisha, but his king says, go to the king of Israel. He marches into the court of his enemy, the king of Israel, throws down all these bags of money and wealth, and says, heal me. Well, the king of Israel didn't seem to be a man of great faith. In fact, he was just an ordinary kind of human being like us, and he sees the king of, or the general of his opposing armies marching into his court, and he says, what are you doing here? Are you trying to kill me or take advantage of me? He totally panicked when he saw the offer or the request for help come to him. And he's just about perhaps to turn and run the other direction away from his enemy, the general Naaman, when he thinks, well, what can it hurt? What can it hurt? And so the king of Israel says, well, I certainly am not God. I'm not the one you need to talk to. You need to talk to this prophet Elisha. So he sent him down to the little village where Elisha lived. With one of his servants, he passed on the word to Elisha, sitting in the back room of his little cottage or his house somewhere. The general of the armies of Aram is here. He wants you to heal him. Well, Elisha must have had a little sense of humor, because he toys with General Naaman a little bit. He says, well, I'm not going to come out and talk to you. I'm going to just send my servant out. And if you trust in my servant, you'll be healed. Well, Naaman he's much too proud to accept this offer. And then Elisha says one thing even further. He says, through his servant, not himself, through his servant, what I want you to do, General Naaman, is to go down to the river of Jordan, our sacred river, and I want you to bathe in that river 7 times. Now, I don't know if any of you here have been to Israel, seen the Jordan River. It's really nothing too much to speak of. It's not any bigger than the Grand River up in Grand Valley, and it's not nearly as clean, and General Naaman knew that. And so he says to the servant of Elisha, there's no way I'm going down to that dirty old Jordan River. It's muddy, it's brown, It's nothing like the sacred rivers back in my home of Damascus. And he names off several of those sacred rivers. Why don't you just tell me to go back to one of those beautiful, fresh, blue flowing rivers in Damascus? That's certainly how I'll be healed. But Elisha says, no, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to go down to the Jordan River, not just once, but I want you to go 7 times, bathing into that muddy old river, and if you do, you'll be healed. Well, Naaman's just about beside himself, but he says, what harm can it do? I guess I'll just do what the prophet says. He goes down, and amazingly to himself, after bathing the 7th time, he rises up and the leprosy is gone. God has helped him, but in entirely different ways than he expected would ever be possible. You know, and that's exactly the way it was for Jesus when he came among us into this world. He touched a leper, and that man was healed. He didn't do anything fancy. He didn't do anything super religious. He didn't express any kind of human power. He just said, do you want me to heal you? And the man said, yes. And Jesus reached out and touched him. And the story says the man was healed. This wasn't a general that stood before him of the armies of Israel who ordered him to be well. It wasn't the king of Israel. It wasn't Herod. It wasn't Pilate. It wasn't anybody of any importance, humanly speaking, that stood before him that day. But it was Jesus. It was the Son of God who stood before him and simply said, do you want to trust in me? Do you want to trust in me? And if you do, if you want me to reach out and touch you and heal you, all you have to do is say, I want your love. I want your compassion. I want you to heal me. And what does Jesus do? He simply says, I am willing. I am willing to do what you ask. Many people in Jesus' day were looking for a Messiah, looking for help from God. And they were looking in various directions. Many, called the Zealots, were looking for a military leader, a military Messiah who would come into Israel and wage war against the armies of Rome, drive them out, and establish a new kingdom of Israel. That's what they expected God to do with this Jesus, with this Messiah who came among them. But Jesus said, no. That may be what you expect, but that's not the salvation. That's not the help that God is going to give you through me. It's not going to be through arms and force and generals and armies. And there were others that said, well, the Messiah who's coming should be the king of Israel. He should be a political powerhouse. He should establish the borders of Israel as they were established back by King Solomon centuries and centuries earlier. What we need from God, what we expect from God, is a political leader who will establish us as a nation, greater than all the other nations of the world, politically speaking. But Jesus said to those who wanted him to be a king, a politician, a human authority, greater than all the other human authorities, Jesus says, no, that may be what you expect, but that's not who I am. That's not what I've come to do. I've simply come to reach out my hand and touch you. To be the Son of God, to be the Messiah, means to reach out and care, to lift up, not perhaps in ways that we would expect or anticipate, but the ways that I am offering to come in the way of love. Jesus is the way of standing before a leper in great need and simply saying to him, are you willing? Are you willing for me to touch you? Do you have faith in me? Do you want to reach out, rely on me and me alone, personally, in personal relationship with me? And I'll make you well. I'll touch you, I'll heal you, I'll meet your every expectation, but I'll do it in my way, which is the way of relationship, which is the way of love, which is the way of my loving you, you loving me, and one another in turn. story told about a congregation, perhaps similar to Tweedsmuir, was meeting one day, Sunday morning, and suddenly the minister who was at the front of the church collapsed. Now, I don't know if this is actually a true story or not, but bear with me. And now this is a church that had a large balcony up above the main seating area. And someone up in the balcony yells out as the minister is thrashing about at the front of the church, "Give him chicken soup." Well, people look back, and the minister's getting worse. He's thrashing about a little bit more, and people are really beginning to panic. And if Judy Bryan was here today, she'd say, "Where's the defibrillator?" But we haven't got one, I guess. And so, again, the voice comes from above the balcony, "Give him chicken soup." Well, by this time, people are yelling back at the man, "Chicken soup won't help. We need a doctor. Is there any doctor in the house?" There's no doctor in the house. The minister has stopped thrashing. Everyone's beginning to wonder if perhaps he's croaked altogether. And this voice from the upper balcony says again, "Give him chicken soup." But by this time, tragically, the minister has died. And the voices yell back up to this man, chicken soup wouldn't have helped him." The man responded, "Well, it couldn't have hurt." I don't know if that's a true story or not. But chicken soup just wasn't what people were expecting. Maybe it would have helped. Maybe that's all the minister needed. We'll never know. A true story is that a young child was brought by his parents to the doctor. And they had a very severe rash on their arms, and the doctor couldn't do anything, gave this medication, that medication, cortisone, all sorts of treatments, and nothing affected the skin rash. Until a friend of the mother had an idea, an old home remedy that she remembered from her childhood days out in the countryside. And so she says to the mom, "Well, just put some vegetable shortening on the rashes." And the mother said, this couldn't possibly work. Got in touch with the doctor and said, "That's foolish. That's not going to do anything at all." But the mother said, "Well," as the rash carried on, "Can it hurt? Can it hurt? Maybe I'll just do, even though I don't expect this to make any difference, maybe I'll just do what my friend has suggested." And sure enough, the shortening, totally contrary to medical wisdom, healed the rash on the child. I don't know what each one of us are finding as a challenge, as a circumstance, as a difficulty in our lives. I hope none of us have leprosy. I hope none of us are going to find ourselves thrashing about in the front of the sanctuary at any moment. But every one of us do have areas of challenge and difficulty and uncertainty in our lives, and we just aren't sure, perhaps at times, what to do about it. And we may even have expectations about what we want God to do about those difficulties and those circumstances. But God says to us in the midst of whatever we are facing, simply trust in me. Simply say in response to my love, "Yes, I'm willing that you touch me. I'm willing that you reach out and place your hand of love and care and compassion that will never end upon me, outwardly, inwardly, wherever that need may be." And maybe totally contrary to whatever we expect, God might just enter the scene of our lives. He might just do what he did to that leper. He might just reach out and touch us and say, "You're well. By the power of your faith, you're well." I wonder, to do just that, could it hurt? Let us pray.